Well, hey, Gundam Maniacs, welcome to another episode of Gundam Explained. In this episode, we're going to look at the history of the Earth Federation. This is a faction of Universal Century, and they're kind of a big deal in Universal Century, I guess, including up against the Principality of Xeon. And I have a previous video on that, but we're going to focus on Earth Federation today. But before we get started, if you haven't, please subscribe, and if this video is pretty cool, give it a like, and check out the links in the description for the Discord, which is a lot of fun, and the Patreon, where we have some pretty cool perks, including exclusive podcasts, exclusive Discord chats, and some other cool things. But let's get started. All right, and so the Earth Federation. It's very interesting how this works. You know, it kind of mirrors a lot of things that we see in real life, and that's kind of what Gundam does in general. But in Universal Century, we had this, the Federation formed at about the same time as UC, and that is July 29th, 1999, according to the wiki, which I'll be using a lot of information from the wiki, and I'll kind of discuss my views on some of this data. You see it first seen in 1999 AD, so that's supposed to be in our timeline, last seen 0218. Now, something I've learned, you know, from reading this and from some of the animation that dives into the history, during 0001, I'm used to saying 00, but 0001, one of the founders of the Earth Federation got killed, founders of the UC, I guess, timeline. This had to do with a terrorist attack on the Laplace colony. So there, I'm already seeing that by this time in, I guess, 1999 AD, we already had space colonies. Now, this could be due to, you know, the original Mobile Suit Gundam taking place in 0079, but it was created in 1979, and I really think the idea with that is, what would the future be like? So it could be by then, 1999, in that timeline, there would be space colonies, kind of like Back to the Future. When you see Back to the Future 2, they're in 2015 with the flying cars, and I think like Jaws 18 or something like that. Okay, but what are the factions against the Earth Federation? Well, we're going to cover quite a large timeline here, and it starts with the Principality of Xeon, moves on to Xeon Remnants, South Seas Alliance, which is more of a Thunderbolt thing. Curious if that also takes place in the proper UC timeline. And then we get to the Anti-Earth Union Group and Karaba, which kind of start when the Titans form during within the Earth Federation. I'll get to that. Then we get to Neo Xeon. So this is where Xeon's kind of regrouped with their chance to take back over the Earth sphere. And then we have Mafty, which is more terrorist, and Zanskare, which is kind of, I guess, a group that kind of filled in the empty space left by Neo Xeon, I guess, kind of being gone at this point. Another one to mention that I didn't see on here, I think, is the Jupiter fleet. I want to say there's a period in time where the Earth Federation had to go to Jupiter and kind of reclaim that area. I guess they had a fleet that was out there mining resources from Jupiter, and they kind of wanted to take power in their own hands, and so Earth Federation obviously goes out to stop them. Now, kind of a common occurrence we're going to see here is where the Earth Federation seems to have good intentions, but there are so many corrupt people in wealthy positions or high up positions when they're wealthy, and they want to make sure everything works for them. So that's why we're going to see these dropped colonies on both sides. We're going to see the things the Titans do that are horrible. And yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff that the Earth Federation does. It's not black and white. Okay, and so some founding history. The Earth Federation was formed in the pre-Universal Century when overpopulation began causing famines, outbreaks of disease, and wars over living space, food, and resources. The inauguration of the Earth Federation's charter marked the beginning of the Universal Century calendar system with the year 0001 UC. But this event was marred by a terrorist attack on Laplace, a space station that had been built as the official residence of the Earth Federation Prime Minister. Laplace was destroyed, and the first elected Prime Minister, Ricardo Marcenas, perished. So, you know, we see 0079 is where the main story starts, although with the origin, which there's some conflicts there, but not a whole lot, it goes back even further to 0068. So it would be even before that that the Laplace instance occurred, but Gundam Unicorn, which is also not only later in the works, but also later in the timeline also, that's where we're getting information about the Laplace incidents and actually the repercussions that are now coming to light at that point in time, where it's almost like in Universal Century, they kind of retconned some prior information. Now, what's interesting about that is we didn't have this prior information anyway. So that means the first leader of the Earth Federation, Ricardo Marcenas. Now, his name might be familiar because, yeah, they talk about him in Unicorn, and we see Riddy, I think, which is considered his great-grandson, yeah. You see him piloting some badass mobile suits. His character arc actually is based on these events that are unfolding, learning about the history of the Earth Federation and how it was formed. So what's interesting about when it came to the Earth Federation forming, it also kind of changes what we know of the alliance between countries and our current modern-day real-life world, or how all that works. Here they've got North America that's composed of Canada, United States, Mexico, the Caribbean, Central America, and the Panama Canal. There's South America as a region. Western Europe, and they're saying that this is similar to the Cold War era. And then Eastern Europe, which is it's a region similar to the Warsaw Pact during the Cold War. And then Eurasia, this region includes most of what was the Soviet Union, starting at the Ural Mountains, and excludes South Asia, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Northeast Asia. You know, another interesting tidbit to think of: when the original Mobile Suit Gundam was created, the world was still in a Cold War. The Berlin Wall had yet to fall. I think it had another 10 years. So it could be that some of the story that is being created, the world building, is based off of a world that's still kind of in that Cold War. We also get Eurasia. So this region includes most of what was the Soviet Union, starting at the Ural Mountains, excludes South Asia, Southeast Asia, Middle East, and Northeast Asia. And then South Asia, this region also includes Southeast Asia. And then East Asia, Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Oceania. So they're not using names that we're very familiar with in terms of countries. So it's not showing at this time countries that would be in power or be in charge. It's using more broad terms, continental names, for instance. So that kind of helps create some sort of, I guess you could create some fictional conflict that comes out of what's happening modern day. And, you know, people could look at that and not react to it good. Because who are the bad guys? Who are the good guys? That's why I like how ambiguous it is here in the Universal Century timeline. And, you know, it really starts with the space colonization. The idea with the Earth Federation was to start building colonies, having colonies on the moon as well, move people out into space as the Earth was being overpopulated. People were dying. The environment was being destroyed. So the idea was you let people live out in the space colonies. Everything will be good on Earth. We can keep that good and we'll treat everyone fairly. But that's not what was going on. The Earth Federation was pulling some crap and not being fair to colonies. And they weren't really doing all that they wanted to do to make the Earth a better place. So this is what caused this upheaval. It caused people to react, push back. That's where we eventually get the Principality of Xeon. And so that's where the 1 Year War is at. So that started at 0079. That's what we're used to from the original Mobile Suit Gundam. But again, you can watch the Origin if you wanted to see some more background to that. But the 1 Year War, the main conflict between the Earth Federation and Principality of Xeon. And it was really the first main, I guess, antagonist to work against the Earth Federation. It's, you know, what really helped the Principality of Xeon really get that upper hand to really be a threat was the engineering of mobile suits, which is really what Gundam is all about. So it's kind of a neat little tie-in of how this story, Gundam UC, started. You know, was when the Earth Federation, it got to a point where a colony didn't want any more of the Earth Federation, turned their mobile suits into weapons of war, and then was able to go out there and be a good show of force against the Earth Federation, but they quickly developed their own mobile suits. And that's when we get to the Grips War. So this is when the Earth Federation had kind of taken out the Principality of Xeon, returned it to a republic. But to make sure something like that didn't happen again, they formed the Titans. So this is an Earth Federation group of, I guess, a group that's creating like specialized prototype mobile suits. But the idea was that they would be able to then put the hammer down on any sort of conflict or uprising that is to occur. So that's almost a very like authoritarian approach to the next step of, you know, wiping out an enemy. What's next? Oh, continue to build more weapons, you know, squash anyone that's trying to create some sort of uprising. And because of that, we had factions from all different sides. We have Neo-Xeon, we had those from Earth like Kuraba and the AU that were fighting against the Titans. But this is what leads to the Neo-Xeon movements, because that whole Grips War caused another weird vacuum, I guess power vacuum that was occurring. And so we have different movements of the Neo-Xeon coming back to fight the Earth Federation. Earth Federation just continues to stop them. You know, one thing I see out of this that I didn't really take into account is when it comes to new types, it wasn't really until, actually, maybe I'm wrong about this now I think about narrative, but we usually see the new types are not really being treated bad. Like we're normally seeing cyber new types from Xeon are usually ones that are put through some turmoil or treated bad. But that doesn't leave the Federation, Earth Federation, off the hook. We see what happened with narrative, what they're willing to do with kids that may or may not even have new type powers in the first place. So, you know, it's very interesting. But, you know, this is what both sides were trying to do, I guess, in order to, you would say, stop. But we've seen through the history of like the 1 Year War where they've allowed war to occur for a reason. And that's probably just to get more funds. You know, people want money, but then what's that money used for? Well, it's to keep the wealthy wealthy, but also to do these crazy experiments like they've done with cyber new types. But, you know, once you get rid of the Neo-Xeon movement, you know, what do you do then? Well, within this, I guess, power vacuum, now that Neo-Xeon has kind of been pushed aside, Earth Federation is, you know, sort of taking a back seat. And this allows domestic terrorism to occur. So that is what actually happens. And that's where we get into Hathaway, because, you know, this is 0100 also. So now we're getting into the 100s of the UC timeline. But yeah, Hathaway Noah, Bright's son, gets involved. It's very interesting how, you know, being the son of Bright, everything that he has seen. But there's almost a point that he's making there, because it's a culmination of all the corruption that the Earth Federation has put forth up until this point. Not that his ways are the right way to go about it, and that's discussed in the movie, but it's just very interesting that they talk on a subject like this, and it's very cool. Now with the Crossbone and Jupiter conflicts, these are very interesting because this is even further after the Hathaway storyline, where there's even more of a regression of the Earth Federation, but more people kind of rising up around places. So we had Cosmo Babylonia, and then they start wanting to take over. They had the Crossbone Vanguard, which was an army, but quickly a couple new types took over Crossbone Vanguard, destroyed Cosmo Babylonia, and it seemed they retained peace. Or did they? Well, this is around the same time where the Jupiter fleet started rebelling. So we had the Earth Federation with the Crossbone Vanguard trying to keep Jupiter in peace, or, you know, the atmosphere of the workers or the ships that are around in that area. So it's very interesting to see how far forward we've moved, where the Earth Federation is, where, you know, other colonies are at. And, you know, this is also a time where the Earth Federation wanted to get back at rebuilding the colonies, making them better, more up to date, continue to allow people to move off of Earth into the colonies so Earth can be, you know, better groomed for living on. But it doesn't happen that way. And you see 0151, the Zanskar War starts. Now, this is a Zanskar Empire that's just like the Xeon, just another group or colony just out in the Earth sphere that decided, hey, we want to stand up and fight back. And they do. Best when the EFF, Earth Federation forces, get in on it. This is around the time of Victory Gundam, which I find to be entertaining. Earth, by this time, almost seems like a post-apocalyptic place, and I think it's really because of how bad it's being treated. And, you know, again, the wealthy or the ones in power of Earth are not really doing their best to save the planet. And so that's where a lot of these conflicts are coming from in the first place. No, it goes to UC 218, and this is a collapse of the Earth Federation government. But watching G Savior, even reading it, it has some very interesting information about what was going on at that time. Really, Earth Federation fell apart. The groups trying to control Earth fell apart. Earth, it was in a troubled place, did not know how it could grow its own crops or food, provide food for the population. In fact, it seemed like space colonies in the Earth sphere started to maybe have that power to where they can kind of control what the Earth does. It's kind of like a flip of what, started with 0079. And then what happens during this time period is there's a group working underwater to try to build farmland underwater where crops can grow in the water. But Consent, which is the Congress of Settlement Nations, which is like a bad group that's within Earth, they wanted to put a stop to that so they can control the farming and everything like that. And, like they say here, the Earth Federation is a global government that was formed by a rich man's club of wealthy Earth nations. The capital of the Earth Federation from UC 1 to 88 was the city of Dakar, which hosted the Earth Federation Assembly. The capital was temporarily relocated to Dublin in UC 0088 when Neo-Xeon occupied Dakar during the first Neo-Xeon War, but Dublin was destroyed later that year by a colony drop. Yeah. Lhasa was subsequently selected as the Earth Federation's new long-term capital in 92. Also, another drop there. And that was Fifth Luna during the second Neo-Xeon War. So we can see every time Earth tries to do something, something is working against it. Well, there you have it. A brief history of the Earth Federation during the UC timeline. Very interesting stuff going on. Following that about, what is it? Almost like nearly 300 years of rise to power and fall due to, if we're going to take a lot of this at face value, kind of the selfishness and the corruption that occurs with the wealthy that are at the top at these governing bodies, where they're not really properly distributing that wealth, whether that's just food, the basis is to survive, or anything like that. And it just seems that it causes them to just fall apart. But in the meantime, we got awesome mobile suits. We got awesome factions they had to fight against. We get awesome stories out of it. And I really like kind of the backdrop of a UC Federation because it's kind of a non-black and white kind of world you're in where we can see the reflections of modern society, the world, the government within these stories. And it's something that we can look at into the future maybe to hopefully make the right decision. I don't know. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like this video if you think it's cool. And yeah, check out the links in the description. A lot of cool stuff there. But anyway, thanks for watching. We'll talk later.